Hey, everybody. See that number continuing to trickle in, trickle up. Boy, I'm just mixing my metaphor. We're all set on YouTube. A lot of love for YouTube recently. I should
Hmm.
remember to ask in post-event surveys why that is. Perhaps that's offering some functionality that Zoom is not and that I
Hmm.
didn't appreciate. And yes, I'm going to call that critical mass,
Yeah.
Elizabeth, and get us going. Say good afternoon formally to this, the June webinar of the Minnesota Association of Library Friends. My name is David Katz. I am Assistant Director of Programs and Services with the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. Many of you know me as Membership and Programming Staff Lead for the Minnesota Association of Library Friends, a role I hold through Library Strategies, which is the in-house consulting firm of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. So MALF really is for, about, and by friends. We got a good mix here today in the call. I'm joining over Zoom. And by that, I mean some very familiar names who I swear never miss a webinar in real time, and folks who I'm pretty sure are altogether new to us, which is great. I dare say that today's topic, effective board decision making, is one that should appeal to everyone by dint of the fact that it applies to each and every friends group out there, every nonprofit period. And as if it were needed, I can say I do have additional evidence for that hypothesis as the first point of contact for MALF's phone line and email inbox. We fairly routinely field questions and concerns that pertain to, when you boil it down to the common denominator, effective board decision making.
Hmm.
So how fortunate for us and for you that we have here in our own backyard, as it were, Propel for Nonprofits, and that they have, as if in their back pocket, a webinar practically already tailor-made to this particular pinch point that friends of the library across Minnesota seem to be experiencing. If it feels like deja vu, that may be because Propel also helmed our May webinar, The 12 Golden Rules of Nonprofit Finance, just about a month ago. And that's up for replay now, by the way, and seeing good numbers for good reason. It really was a quality hour, as I'm sure this will be in just a second. So as to not over-engineer things, I'll invite Elizabeth to introduce herself, or for some of you, reintroduce, and the wonderful thing that is Propel for Nonprofits before diving right into the meat of today's content. The one housekeeping note from me here is an invitation to all to type questions you have into chat whenever they occur to you and whichever platform you are on. So that goes for Zoom and YouTube both. I'll be your proxy, your mouthpiece, and read them out. Elizabeth is going to stop periodically so that topical questions don't grow stale, waiting for us to reach the end of the hour, though I'm sure we'll cap off with last questions as well,
Hmm.
per usual. But with that, Elizabeth, no further ado, please take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much, David. It's so good to be here with you again. I was here with you all last month supporting Paul in 12 Golden Rules, and I'm here today. You'll hear much more of my voice today than last time. So, again, welcome. Thank you for having me. And I really love this topic, and I think it's so relevant to the work that we do as board members. Again, I'm Elizabeth Appel. I'm on the trading team here at Propel. I have been with Propel for about 7 or 8 years. And then before that, I did about 10 or 12 years in another nonprofit. So I am steeped in the work of nonprofits. I serve on boards myself, small working boards that are very hands-on, bigger institutional boards where more governance work is experienced. And I work with boards all day long. So hopefully I will come to you today with knowledge and examples, and I hope to hear from you too. Again, if you're not familiar with Propel, I really encourage you. You have your great support with the Minnesota Association of Library Friends, but also Propel is here to support Minnesota nonprofits as well. Propel is a capacity building organization that supports boards with governance, finance, and capital. We realize that you probably joined a nonprofit because you were passionate about the mission, and all of a sudden you're doing things like Robert's rules and governance and finance and all those sorts of things, and you might need some extra support. So we are here to support you with that. So to get started today, I just want to talk to you a little bit about kind of where we're going to move. So first, we're going to talk about different types of decisions, what sort of decisions boards should be making. Then we're going to talk about the considerations that you should think about while you're making decisions. We're going to talk about different approaches to decision making and different examples of what's being used. And then I'll share some tools at the end that hopefully will guide you in the right direction and help you with effective decision making for your boards. The first place I want to go, and but kind of before we get started, is I just want to like talk about why decision making is important. And so we have a couple reasons why decision making is important and why we're going to spend some time talking about it and probably why you're struggling with it or really need to think about it for your own board. First is that when boards are making bad decisions or poor decisions, that really opens up your nonprofit for risk. It opens up your nonprofit for financial risk and reputational risk if you are not making good decisions for your nonprofit. So that's why we want to make sure that we're empowering boards to make effective decisions. Next, slow decisions, which is maybe more common for boards, is missed opportunities. The longer you wait to make decisions and push off decisions, oftentimes the less opportunities you have. One thing you'll probably hear me say a lot is no, making no decision is also making a decision. So if your organization is putting off decisions and they're not making them, that is also a decision that has an impact on your organization. And so missed opportunities is often the consequence of slow decisions. The further we get ahead of problems or issues or opportunities, the more chances we have to make to do different things. So that's what that. And then finally, a strong process and strong decision making has better impact for nonprofits. So that's just a little behind the scenes of why, or like a little level setting of why we really talk about decision making for boards. Next, I'm going to launch a poll. And I guess I told David I wanted to do these polls, but I didn't tell them when. So this is the first poll that I would love to do. And I know on YouTube, you can't necessarily do the polls, but if you want to think about it yourself or type your comments into the chat, of what decision-making process that your board currently uses. Do they use majority rule? Do they totally avoid decision making? Do you have one or two people who dominate the process? Do you use some sort of consensus? Or do you use some sort of strict adherence to the rules, to Robert's rules? Do you want to share and you can kind of see what other people are doing as well, where we're getting our answers?
All right, I'll give that 3, 2, 1, and share results.
Thank you.
All if you're not seeing them.
Awesome. So we have a little bit of everything. So we have some mostly majority rule. We have one person who says one or two people dominate the process. This is an anonymous survey, or anonymous poll, so you can know that you're there. And then some people use consensus, which I love to see as well. So we'll talk about kind of what these look like, and you'll have to have that lens as we go through today. So first to start out, I want to talk about the types of decisions that boards are making. So there are lots of decisions that boards need to make. And so I really want to talk about but they're not all of like kind of the same importance, or need the same sort of attention. So let's talk about a couple different things that boards do. So first, we have the formal actions that boards take. These are things that require a vote and are recorded in the minutes. These are decisions that must be formally approved and documented. So examples of this would be approving your annual budget, hiring or terminating an executive director, adopting or amending your bylaws, approving a major partnership or merger, or also kind of authorizing a large capital expense like buying a building. So big things like that. The next type of decision that organizations or boards need to be making are oversight and compliance decisions. These are your legal and fiduciary duties that are often outlined in your bylaws and policies. And this is making sure that your organization is financially sound and compliant and accountable. What are these types of decisions? So these are like reviewing your financial statements and looking at audit results if you have one. These are monitoring organizational risk. This is ensuring compliance with grant requirements, approving policies like conflict of interest policies, and also evaluating the executive director. So oftentimes these are laid out in your bylaws. The next type of decision boards are often making are implementation decisions. So this is strategy development and monitoring. This is kind of figuring out what are those big picture ideas and big picture priorities for the organization. So these are things like approving your strategic plan, deciding to launch or sunset a major program, setting the organizational priorities for the next few years. So like approving a strategic plan, deciding to expand to a different new area or geography, or choosing to start a new program or a new initiative that's aligned with your mission. So that's that implementation type of decision. And then finally, we have recommendations. So this is when a committee or an advisory level group makes a recommendation about something that should be done and the board approves it. So this is things like your finance committee recommended a draft budget for the board, or the governance committee proposed a new slate of board members, or the program committee recommended changing services, or a task force suggested a new fundraising strategy, right? So this is what that really looks like. And so those are the four different types of conversations that you're going to be having. Um, we have it set up kind of in this list as the top decisions, those formal actions are more formal, they need the highest authority, and they're also probably the least frequent. Not often, once a year you're approving the annual budget. You're not hopefully hiring a new executive director all that often. You're probably not changing your bylaws all that often, right? But those are the ones that need the more formal, highest authority, but they're less frequent. And then kind of as we go down, these are things that are more frequent and are more like prep work for the rest of the organization. And so as you move up kind of this list, that those are decisions that require more formality and risk and full board involvement. Oftentimes lower on the list, they're more conversational and more preparatory for the other work that's being done for your organization. So, as you think about these different types of decisions, we really want to lay the groundwork. So, first, when we're thinking about the decisions our board's making, kind of identifying what type of decision we're making. Is it a formal, is it a recommendation? Is it oversight? What does that look like? And so, when we're thinking about the decisions to be made, first, we want to think about what exactly is being decided. Um, is it so we want to be really clear about, is it something that we're approving as a whole? Are we approving a pilot? Like, what is the decision we're actually making? And then we really want to define all of those things that go into it. Like, what is the timeline for the decision? Who is actually responsible? Who has that who's responsible for the work of the decision? Who will be consulted? Who are we going to talk to? And then who has the final authority? And then any other considerations that need to be put into place. So, an example of this, once we determine what the decision is, we want to just determine the process. So, an example this that I thought up of was that your organization is considering launching a new after-school program. That will cost, let's say, $50,000 annually, an amount that should be big for your organization. Whatever big looks like for your organization, they're considering launching a new after-school program. So the first, we want to clarify the decision. What exactly are we asking the board to do? Are we asking them if we're going to launch the program or not? Are we asking them if we want to pilot the program for a year? Like, what is that decision that we're asking? And then when we move to defining the process, we want to talk about the timeline. When does this decision have to happen by? In this example, it could be determined by grant deadlines or by a school calendar, right? We need the decision by September to meet grant deadlines, or we need the decision by June to make sure people get registered, right? Who needs to decide? Is it something that the executive director gets to decide? Is it something that the treasurer gets to decide? Or do we need full board approval for this discussion? Who are we going to talk to? We're going to talk to the executive director. We're going to talk to the program staff. We're going to talk to the finance committee. community. We're going to talk to community partners to see about this decision. And then who has final authority? This would be because it's a large, for this organization, it's a large decision, and it would impact their organization. We want a full board vote. And so that's kind of what we're thinking about. When we're thinking about what decisions we're making, we want to clarify what we're doing, and then we're defining the process so it just doesn't sit out there. I'm sure you have sat in board meetings. I have sat in many board meetings where we talk about the same decision over and over again, and we never make any progress because there isn't like, what is the timeline for this, or who gets to decide, right? We're just kind of talking in circles and it keeps getting brought back up. If we're really thinking about defining the process from the outset and talking about who has the final authority, who are we going to talk to, when do we have this decision by, it really helps move that process along. The next thing that we want to do when we're making decisions is think about other considerations. So, what are those other considerations that we're thinking about? For organizations, we have these kind of four considerations that we have. So this is really a lens that your board should think about every time we're thinking about a decision. And so maybe it's not for every decision, right? Some decisions need more time and more board involvement than others, but we want to make sure that we're kind of thinking about these decisions as they go. So first, we're thinking about the mission and the vision and the values of the organization and how we're using those things, that mission, vision, and values, to make decisions for our organization. So one of the questions that I first ask is how closely it's related to your mission and vision and values and the strategic direction of your organization. If it's really closely related, like starting a new program or making some pretty significant changes, then we want to give that decision a lot of space for people to come to a decision, right? This isn't just like a one-off board meeting. We want to have a lot of time and space. If it's more logistical, like when is the December board meeting going to happen, that might not need as much time and space to talk about. And so we might not need to give it as much lead time. Another thing to consider when thinking about mission and vision and values in relation to decisions your board is making is, will it distract from or detract from other things that we're working on and other higher priorities, right? Is it a really good opportunity, but it's going to take away a ton of staff time from the core or a ton of board time from the core of what you could do, right? It could be really great. It could be a great opportunity, but it will like distract from the main purpose of your work. And so maybe it's not worth that. And then finally, I think that always a good question to ask is if we don't make a decision, what will happen, right? If we don't launch that program, will someone else launch it? Will a group of people not be served? I think that's also really important. So not how will it benefit us, but also what are the consequences of not doing it? Next, when we think about considerations, we're thinking about equity. So what does that look like? I often think about this as like that your board is a specific group of people who's in the room and you are representing the community. And so who do we want to make sure who is also in the room? So we want to, that's the voices we really want to consider. So when we're thinking about the decision we're going to make, who will be most impacted by the decision? Who do we want to make sure has their voices heard? Is there any invisible cost to any individuals by us making this decision? Is also important. Thinking about any unintended benefits, right? So we might make a decision and we want to think about the things that might work out poorly, but we also want to think that there might be some unintended consequences. And then also, will the decision cause any harm? So this one I think is a helpful. One of the examples that I thought of is thinking about whether a board is deciding whether to move a long-standing community program from the current accessible neighborhood that it's in to a newer facility across town because it'll save costs. And so who will be impacted? So that's something that's a big decision to consider. Who will be impacted? So the participants who might rely on transportation to get there, families in the current neighborhood who see it as an easy program or an accessible way to work, and then staff who live near the current location, they would also be impacted. If we're thinking about any invisible costs, there's increased travel time and transportation barriers. There might be reduced participation from people who usually have participated. And there could also be a loss of trust in the community that you're leaving. But are there unintended benefits, right? We're going to save money. There's also improved facilities and space for programming. Will be better able to serve the people in the community, and it might attract new participants from different areas. And so could this cause harm? Will this decision cause any harm? It could unintentionally exclude people who we were serving before, and it could shift our focus, right? We could be shifting to a new area or a new community, and that would be that we weren't necessarily attended to when our goal was just to save costs, right? And so these are things to consider. I don't think there's necessarily a right answer, but we want to make sure if we're making these big decisions for our programs, we have all of these thoughts on the table. Next, I want to talk about community impact. And so this is another lens to think about. Um, to for the community impact. So has the community indicated that this is an important decision, right? Do they want you to change programming? Have you gotten requests for this to happen? Um, how will we serve community partners? Will this look differently? How will we connect with people differently? In that last example of changing locations, do we need a different person providing the catering? Do we need different transportation, right? Is there some unintended impact for that? And then will this decision expand or limit our ability to be present, right? If we're going to do more work in this area, will it allow us to do other work in other places? And so those are things to think about. You might not have a yes to all of these questions. You might not know the answer to all these questions, but I think it's really important just to bring them up and to consider them and making sure that you're representing what the community really needs. And then finally, I think it's important for boards to think about capacity. So, what are the realistic costs? The true costs of running this. What do we really need to do this? Are there any like constraints that we have? Is a long-term financial investment? Are we getting into a 5-year lease if we're moving? Are we giving up a space and community that we had before? Are the timelines and workloads realistic for our staff and for our board who are doing this work? And then is also, does it impact other work, right? Are we spending less time on this because we're doing this work? And so these are all things to be considered. Again, I don't think that like if one of the things says like yes, yes, it will impact our other timelines, that doesn't necessarily mean we shouldn't do it, but we should consider it, right? These are considerations that we're making. Okay, I see that there's one question in the chat.
Yes,
I'm
we
gonna
actually
see.
have several
Oh,
questions.
great, let's do it.
If I can pull one from YouTube to get us going. You had an example there, Elizabeth, about getting a program up and rolling or getting
hmm
consensus around a new idea that could morph into a program. This is, I guess, is the opposite of that. Somebody wondering how to broach the subject of sunsetting a program, one that has diminishing returns, when one is a, co-equal member of a board, trying to
hmm
broach that subject with peers.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. I wish I would have used that myself, right? Sometimes like the time has come for organizations or for programs to sunset. One of the things that I often talk about is there are life stages of nonprofits and there are life stages of nonprofit programs. And it has first it's kind of started up at its grassroots and then we've gotten going and now we're at a spot where we either need to uh, change something or decline and dissolve it. And so I think it's a natural part of an organization's life and a program's life of like we worked really hard at it. It's been going really well. And now we need to either change it significantly or we need to shut it down. And one of the things, and I think this goes back to some of the considerations we were talking about, is what is the cost of doing this program and is it taking away from other work we could be doing? Like if we are putting all of our time and money and energy kind of trying to stand up a program that's flailing a little bit, that means we could have been putting our time and energy and money into something new and different that might better serve the community. I think the thing that I'm not saying in this is there are lots of feelings that go along to some of these programs,
Mhm.
right? That have served communities for a long time, that might be people's pet projects. So that is not an easy question to do. So I would think that the framing might be like, is this financially viable anymore? Like, is it still serving our community? And just because someone loved this very specific fundraiser for many, many years doesn't mean it's like still serving the mission and vision of our organization. So that is how I would frame it. I'm not saying that won't be a hard discussion still.
Sure, of course, of
Yeah.
course. We sometimes like to frame it, Mal's board, as a discussion of opportunity costs. The
Yes. Yeah.
resources we're putting
Absolutely.
into XYZ prevent us from doing ABC.
Yeah.
Perhaps XYZ served us well in the past, but is that the way forward?
Yeah. And I think
Now,
one thing that I often think about too is a way to say goodbye to it well. Like, so if we're shutting down a program, instead of like letting it whimper to a close, right? Like, how can we honor the work that was done in that program and celebrate it and do like one final farewell before we move on until like that organization has brought our or that program has brought our whole organization to a halt, and then we have to like do it in a panic. So, like, how can we say goodbye well to some of the programs we've done?
I like that. Very
Yeah.
bold, celebratory, even. So for this next question, I'm actually going to combine two because we have
Yeah.
versions of it both on YouTube and Zoom. One specific to executive committee, the other referencing committees generally, I
Yeah.
think with an emphasis on membership and programming committee work.
Hmm.
Those are committees that tend to have a lot of pull for friends groups generally. Basically, wanting to know rules of thumb, general advice, best practices you have around when a board should delegate a responsibility or bunt a decision to some subgroup of itself, and what is media enough, high level enough that the board as a whole should be contending with it.
Yeah, so I would say a couple things I would recommend. One is to be really clear on your committees. So I really suggest that committees all have committee charters. So this would be like the purpose of the committee, who's on the committee, what budget they have, what authority they have, and then how do they report back up to the full board. So I think it's really easy for committees to kind of like I always say they like turn into like monsters and no one knows who's in charge and what are we supposed to be doing and who's in like what do we do? So I think being really clear on the role of every committee is important. On our website, we have like committee charter examples. So if you need something to look at to start a committee charter, I think that's really helpful. I would say that you shouldn't punt off decision making. Like the board still I don't know what the exact decision is, but for the most, like if it is the color of the banner, the events committee can probably make that decision, right? But if we're thinking about like big decisions like budgets, I think when you move it to committee, it is for them to like have vibrant discussion, to think about it, to move the conversation forward, and then come back with a recommendation that the full board needs to approve. Um, they can't like say that we're like, oh, we don't do money stuff. Like that's not what you're allowed to do as a board, but I think you can like pass it off to a committee to have discussions. Oftentimes I think those are great. How to identify those are like if your board has like discussed the same thing 3 months in a row, you're like, what if a task force takes
Mhm.
this on, t has some discussion and comes back with a recommendation? Um, for that, but then the board needs to be able to be like to be willing to get behind a recommendation of that a committee has made.
Great, thank you for that. I'm smiling
Yeah.
because on the call with us here today is former MAL President Nancy Garino, who was helming us for a good 8 years and did just incredible yeoman's work putting together charters for all of
Good.
our operative committees
Yeah, so look at
and
those
are
charters.
really
Yeah.
practicing what you're preaching. So I would say Malf is above board in all those respects, and Nancy's the one to thank. So funny that she's on
Good.
the call.
Yeah, that's
Um,
great. And I think those are great examples to be used for sure.
And now, Elizabeth, I do have three other questions, but I fear they may touch on things you're going to be covering in the next slides anyway.
Yes.
So I'm just
Hmm.
going to hold them for the time being.
Perfect. Yeah. Let's keep moving. I think to like wrap up that idea is and you if you've ever been in a training with me before, you've probably heard me say this. I always think clear is kind. And so to be really clear about your expectations and the roles that people have, and that is kind to people, right? If they're not operating in a space where they don't know really what's going on or they don't know how we make decisions, being really clear about the decisions that are being made is kind to everyone. So One of the things that I want to talk about is some of those like iffy parts of decision making, the times when decision making feels really hard. And so this is part of participatory decision making is this is kind of a model or like a visual of what it looks like. And you've probably have felt this when you've been making decisions for your organization. And so first we have that new topic that gets brought up, and then we start to have those familiar opinions, but then we start to discuss more, and we have some more diverse perspectives, and then we get into the groan zone, and that's a place that feels really uncomfortable, and oftentimes people want to like stop, right? They want to stop because it doesn't feel like good. We don't know if we're moving forward, right? But I really encourage people to like push through that groan zone and get to a place where we're prioritizing the decisions that we're making, we're selecting it, and we're coming up to a decision point, right? So I think making sure that we're leaving space for new and different ideas. And you might come up with an ideas or solutions you never thought you could have. One of the trainings that we run is on scenario planning, and we always encourage people to come up with 8 different scenarios that they want to work on because 8 is a place where we're like pushing ourselves past where we normally think, right? We're like, okay, we have some like normal scenarios that we're working off of, and then we really push people to think a couple steps farther, and to make sure that we're like kind of playing out some different ideas. I think it's very common for people who want to immediately take action, and that is their style. This feels really uncomfortable for them. Um, but I don't want you to like cut off some of that work too soon, right? If we cut off some of that discussion and that decision making in before the grown zone, we might not have gotten to the decision making point that we wanted to. So I just want to share this as an example of that. If this feels hard for you and decision making feels hard, that's oftentimes normal, but that we really want to push people to think differently and come up with new and creative solutions. So another part of decision making is kind of matching practice versus policy. So practice is the way that we usually do things. So this is informal, this is personality driven, this is often inconsistent with the word, inconsistent. Sometimes we make decisions one way, sometimes we make decisions the other way, depends on who's in charge that week. And then there's policy. That is the way that we have formally agreed to do things. That means it's documented and predictable, and accountable, right? So practice is the way we usually do things. Policy is often the way that is laid out in the bylaws. And we really want to make sure these two align. And because oftentimes if conflict comes up, the bylaws get to win. So what are examples of when policy and practice aren't in alignment? So how we make decisions. So in practice, decisions are often made by consensus if no one adjusts, and sometimes decisions are gone back to after meetings and revisited in future meetings. But our policy says that the bylaws specify when a vote is required and what constitutes approval. And so we really want to make sure that we have clear policy, which prevents confusion and second guessing. Another example that I have of this is like when we're thinking about our attendance policy for board meetings. So in practice, there are people who don't attend very often or attend sporadically, but these are tolerated because we really want them on the board because they've got a great name, or we don't want to have an uncomfortable conversation, so we let them keep coming or not coming, but we don't really address it. Our policy or our bylaws may require that a board member would be removed after having a set number of unexcused absences. So we really want to make sure that our policy supports having a shared responsibility among all board members for attendance and the decisions that are being made. And so we really want to make sure those things match, right? We really want to work hard on making sure the practice that we have reflects the policy that we have. And if our practice doesn't reflect the policy, then we need to like either change how we're practicing the work or change the policy. Your bylaws can be changed if you need to change them, but I think it's really important to match them. Another way I think it's really important to match them is that oftentimes, when we think about, sorry, my computer is just froze a little bit. Okay. Oftentimes when we think about why people aren't engaged in board meetings or why people aren't engaged in discussion around decision making, it's because they don't know what the rules are. And so oftentimes, if they don't know what the rules are, they don't know how we're making decisions, they're not going to jump in. And so I say, oftentimes say, if we are really clear about our policies and we follow our policies, board members will be able to jump in more quickly to make sure that they are to contribute and to know how to contribute. So, when we're talking about policies, one of the things that I want to talk about is Robert's rules, because oftentimes Robert's rules is what organizations use in some form, right? They are putting up discussion, they are adding discussions, or they're putting up things for a vote. People are seconding them, people are approving them. We're doing those sorts of votes. And so but I think it's important to really consider Robert's rules because I don't always think it's the best way to do decision making, although sometimes it is. So Robert's rule, people usually use some sort of Robert's rules. And so what does Robert's rules do really well? It creates structure and really clear procedures for people. People usually know it is told when we vote and how we document those votes. Robert's rules was really developed as for large group decisions. So if you are having some sort of membership meeting where there's a large amount of people, it really allows a way for kind of fairness in a large or more formal setting, right? It is parliamentary procedure. And it can also provide a really constant way to vote and make decisions. There is less kind of unsuredness about this work. But sometimes they fall short, right? Sometimes Robert's rules don't really get us where we need to be. Robert's rules often limit generative or open discussion. It really privileges people who know the rules. I always say you don't know Robert's rules unless you were in 4-H when you were in middle school. Like myself, I often still struggle through Robert's rules, even though I do governance as a job. They can often feel really rigid and slow when you're making complex decisions. And also, I think it's a reminder that Robert's rules were developed by white male landowners, right? And so they were developed for people in parliament, and that doesn't always reflect the people that we're serving now. So I think it's something to take into account. And we really want to make sure that the way that we're operating, the way that we're doing our work, the policies that we have also matches the practice, right? And so we want to make sure those things fit together. And so what I see most often is that some sort of Robert's rules is used for formal actions or votes, right? So like when we are approving the budget, we are using Robert's rules, but when we're using more flexible approaches for discussion and consensus, when we have more other decisions to be made, right? If we're talking about a new program, we might have some more consensus building or consensus related discussion topics before we take that Robert's Rules vote. So now that we've talked about practice and policy, I want to ask one more poll question. Do you feel like your practice and your policy are in alignment? Does your board have the policies in place and have the practice to match, or are they a little off?
Harder to quantify on YouTube, but a lot of
Yes.
candid no there.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
yeah,
and one of the ways that I think can be really helpful to talk about um we have a little bit of not re sort of, no, yes, everything's kind of in the middle. It looks like we have a little bit of everything. One of the ways that I think we can start to work towards putting practice and policy alignment is doing a regular review of our bylaws and any sort of like board manual. So I often think that like once a year is a great way to have someone. I usually suggest it's a role for the secretary, or if you don't have a secretary, maybe a vice chair to review the bylaws and the board manual to make sure like the way that we're operating is the way that we say we're going to operate. And if it's not, if they're not in alignment, how are we going to adjust those things to better align them? So next I want to go through approaches to decision making. Um, I will see if there's any. I'll do a quick question or two, David, if there are any.
yeah,
Okay.
yes, yes, there are. Don was asking about you had a bullet about accountability, what accountability looks like in a policies and procedures context.
hmm Uh, this will be jogging my memory of what I just said a few minutes ago, but usually I think we want to hold there should be some sort of like accountability in the mix when we're talking about like sorry, let me get my thoughts together. So if, like one of the examples I gave is like the accountability of like if people don't show up to board meetings, like how can we hold them accountable for not
Mm.
showing up to board meetings? I think it's really easy to pass off like, oh, well, we don't talk about it because it feels weird to address things like that. We want to make sure that we're continuously to hold ourselves accountable for what we said we were going to do. And if it's the practices, the things that are informal, it's hard to hold ourselves accountable because those are unspoken rules. But if we have really clear rules of the way that we're operating, it's easier to hold ourselves accountable, if that makes sense.
That's an interesting nuance there with that example because you're talking about basically as a group holding yourselves accountable to
Yeah.
holding one or two individuals accountable, sort of
Yeah.
a reciprocal nature to it, not just I don't know, a punitive mechanism.
Yeah. And that's what boards are weird like that, right? You're like a group of peers who are all in charge, but you do have to hold each other accountable for the work that you said you were going to do.
It's very strange. You're not coworkers, you're not friends. Well,
Yeah.
you are, but that's not why you're at the table. Okay, we have a question that I'm going to hold, but just to
Okay.
tease it, Elizabeth, uh, kind of a rider to the question we asked and answered around committees about board officers and what roles they should have or
hmm
take on when decision making, but we can
hmm
table that if you care to, because approaches might speak to that somewhat.
Yeah, let's talk about approaches and then let's see if we get where we want it, if we need
Cool.
to get somewhere soon. Okay. So let's talk about some different approaches to decision making. So I have like a list of approaches that I'm gonna run through. So first, we're gonna talk about the different approaches to decision making. So first approach is making no decisions, right? That is an option. Boards can often avoid or delay making decision, but that is still a choice. Like I've said a couple times, by making no decision, you are making a decision. There are consequences to making no decision. But if I think I always try to be clear if I'm in a board meeting or if I'm in a supporting role at a board meeting, if the board is putting off making a decision, I say like, okay, let's be clear that we are making a decision by not making a decision. And so we should be clear about that as well. Oops, sorry, I was one behind. So another way to look at it, another decision is a way we make decisions is decide and announce. So like the executive director or a board chair just decides the way that we're going to do things, and then we do them that way. So oftentimes this is like small repetitive decisions, right? We don't want the executive director to like decide and announce the board. Like a new program or something outside of their realm. But if it's like, this is when we're going to meet, or this is things like that, that can often be a decide and announce sort of thing. Next is gathering input and deciding, right? So the when we're thinking about what is the decision to be made, the executive director or the board chair or the executive committee or an officer, they would gather information and they can kind of move faster than the full board and they'll be able to decide based on the information that they gathered from a group of people. Another way to make decisions is have a small group. So this is where committees work really well. Task forces is what I love. I love when you're like in a board meeting and you're like, we're not getting anywhere, but could a couple people meet for a short amount of time, a couple times in the next few weeks and really hammer out what this looks like, and then bring it back to the full board. So this is really great when they have like a very specific role. So like like I was just on a task force that was reviewing one of the boards I'm on is launching a capital campaign, and we interviewed all the different capital campaign consultants and provided a decision, right? So it was like a bunch of meetings over a couple weeks, and then we provided feedback, right? And then the board could decide. Next, we have large group decision making. So this is when the full board needs to be involved in decision making. This is really important organization-wide decisions. So opening a new program, closing a new program, hiring an executive director. These are full group decisions that need to be made. Another type of decision is consensus-based decision or modified consensus. This looks a little different. This often is used by committees or the full board, and this allows all voices to be heard, and allows everyone to have an opinion. And we'll talk about consensus building in a second and models for consensus building. Finally, there's a just the option of asking someone else, right? If you don't know the answer, if your board doesn't feel like they know the answer, using some sort of advisory committee or ad hoc committee or asking an expert, right? Like if your board is not a group of lawyers, maybe you need to bring in a lawyer to help you make this decision. And so this is really helpful to gather that input, and know what that looks like. And then finally, there's the option of testing or approach or a new idea. So sometimes if your organization is feeling nervous about launching something new, kind of bringing it back a step and thinking about, could we test a new approach? Could we test some things out? Could we pilot new ideas? Could we make some different decisions before making a big change in the way that we're doing things? So kind of testing out new ideas and a different way of thinking can be really helpful. So I want to share some tools and examples when we're thinking about thinking about decision making. And so one of those things is dealing with indecision. So when we're thinking about indecision, when boards don't know how to make decisions or make effective decisions, what are some like tips that we can use to help with this? So one is going back and using the mission and vision and values of your organization as a guidepost, right? Let's use that as a lens to make decisions for our organization. Next, I think it's really important that board members feel comfortable asking questions in order to gain some clarity. I think sometimes, especially new board members, or if you've created a culture where there's only one or two voices that speak, board members might not feel like they can ask questions. And so, thinking about how you can have board members kind of ask questions before you have them make a decision. Another way to do this would be kind of instituting a policy of we call it like 1, 2, 4 all. So one, they think by themselves. Two, you pair up with someone else and you talk through the decision that's being asked to be made. Four, you two groups join together, and so four people have a discussion, and then you have a discussion as a full group. So 1, 2, 4, and then all. This might feel really slow for people who are used to being the louder voice in the room, and I'm saying this as oftentimes the loudest voice in the room. They might feel uncomfortable with this, but I think it often brings clarity. It brings new voices. It allows people to share in different ways. It recognizes that some people are different types of communicators. And so really having, being able for board members to ask those different questions. Ensuring that a conflict resolution process is in place. What do we do if we can't make a decision, right? Where do we go from here? And again, being clear about the impact of indecision. If your board is still not making decisions, being like, okay, if we go one more month without approving the budget, this is what's going to happen. How I've seen that happen before is when the board is facing some pretty scary budget decisions and they're not sure what to do. The farther we go down the road of having some bad budget decisions to make, the less options we have, right? If we're continuously running out of money or running at a deficit, our options are getting less and less every time we don't make a decision. And so then also, I think one of the really great ones here is highlighting when movement and decision are more important than consensus. So it would be great to come to consensus, but again, if we don't move on something, if we don't address an issue, it might have bigger consequences than trying to all get us on the same page. So I've said consensus a few times here, and I want to talk about what consensus means or what a consensus making process can look like. So this is a consensus model. So you have board members vote on a scale. Sometimes I think 8 is kind of a big scale, but I think it does give you some perspective on where people can be. And so it goes from 1 being like, I am totally in agreement. This is the perfect decision for this organization, all the way to 7 being like, I do not agree at all. Do not count on my support, or 8 being, we need to block this and start over. And why I think this is helpful in decision making, and why I often encourage organizations to do this is when boards sometimes you don't feel like so opposed that you're going to vote no on something, right? You're like, I don't feel like a veto of this is important, but there's somewhere between absolutely not, we shouldn't do this, and absolutely 100% in agreement. And sometimes the nuance can be helpful in bringing more light and feeling like more voices can be offered. So the way that you can use this is you kind of consider the proposal, right? Have people consider the proposal, think about where they are on the scale. And if you have reservations, so if you are like a 5, 6, 7, or 8, if you're voting in that space, you have to be able to share with the group what could help change to move you towards 1. So if you're coming with an 8, you're coming with a 7, being able to say like, okay, I have a 7, but if we change something or if we address something, that would be helpful to move me forward. So that's an example of consensus making. So this is what this looks like. So board members can say they can indicate agreement or disagreement. They can register dissent. They can register that they don't like it without totally blocking the vote, right? They can be like, I'm really concerned about this, but it doesn't say like we can never move forward with this. It says like this is what I am concerned about. And if it is blocked, if it is in this space of like 7 or 8, we have to think about what we do when that happens. So I know that some people have like consensus -1. So they're saying like they have a consensus vote, they want everyone to approve or they want everyone to be on the higher end. But if one person says no, they're still going to move forward. Or some groups work with complete consensus, right? They want everyone on that high end of the spectrum before they move forward. But when we have some or we have some disagreement, if someone says, I don't want to move forward with this, let's think about what we're going to do next, right? Do we have to modify the proposal? Do we have to create it allows some opportunities to have dialogue? Um, it also gives a place for people to say like, I don't have an opinion about this, right? I feel like I'm that sometimes. Sometimes people feel really strongly and some people be like, I sure whatever people think, but I don't really have a strong opinion. So it just allows for more than just yes or no. I think when we use Robert's rules and we use yes versus no, it really stops any sort of discussion. But if we can open up our discussions to have more nuance, it allows for new ideas, it allows for more voices, it allows for people who don't necessarily want to speak up in that like yes versus no space, but are allowed to speak up when there's some more nuance in that space. So I'm leaving some time at the end for questions. I know I went a little fast at the end, but I want to make sure that we're going to do these 3 things at your next board meeting. This is what I'm going to suggest. And then we'll take some more questions before I totally wrap up. But first, I would ask you when you're next time you're making a decision at your board meeting to clarify what your decision is. So pick one decision that your board is making. Are we approving the budget? And really be clear about, again, what are we actually deciding? What is the timeline? Who is responsible? Who's going to be consulted? And what is that final authority? Um, and then identify where your policies and practice might not align, where they do align, where they might not align, and think about how you can get them to align. And then finally, thinking about how to choose a decision-making approach intentionally. So thinking about all those different approaches. Is this a task force? Is this a consensus? Is this someone decides and announces, right? Thinking about being really intentional about how we're making decisions about this. Okay, I am ready for questions if you are, David.
Yes, yes, I think we have some good closers, plus some fun side chatter about sort of the appropriate one-time decision-making mechanism to talk about the permanent uh,
Hmm.
intentional, to use your
Okay.
word, decision-making approach that the organization will use
Yep.
going forward. So that's funny. And indicates value and traction, but no question there. So Lynn and Jack, I'm going to combine your questions because I think you're asking 2 sides of the same coin. So Elizabeth, as you know, Friends of the Library are private foundations supporting
Hmm.
public organizations. We're kind of odd ducks, not unique. I think of PTAs and school
Yep.
districts, or down the road from us is the Como Friends, and they support the
Hmm.
Como Zoo and Conservatory, owned and operated by the city of St. Paul. So we're not unique, but friends are odd in the sense that we're attached to a larger organism, and our mission is to align with theirs and further their aims. So I
Hmm.
think that the questions really hinge around how do you ensure, if you're working within the organization that has its own board, that you're playing well with that other board and staying in communication.
Hmm. I remember last time you had mentioned like last session we had there was some chatter about like MOUs and making sure that we have
Mhm.
some MOUs. I think that's helpful. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you pulled that. That is a big one, frankly,
yeah.
because that is sort of a playbook that will, once in place, dictate when a decision requires support and buy-in from the
Hmm.
library director, and what sort of funding opportunities are automatically off the table, no
Hmm.
discussion required. A lot of MOUs in our space will say that, third parties with no library or literary focus, support through the Friends is off the table, full stop.
Hmm.
So things like that, nice shortcuts.
Yeah, and I think I think this to me this is like something there's like something happening, right? So some people there's like something that people are responding to, and so I think like um if there's like an issue that people are discussing on their board with that relationship, I would really go back to like clarifying the decision that we're making. Like, are we saying, like, what is the decision? Is it on the table that we're like not going to support them anymore? Is it on the table that we're not going to support them in this way? Is it, like being really clear about what the discussion is that we're having and the decision we're trying to make? And then I think that is I think you're going to want to use like that modified consensus, right? So like where do people fit? But then eventually you're going to want to have like a straight up and down vote for people. If you are making some sort of big visionary decision for your organization about who they're supporting or how they're supporting them, you're going to want that vote to be very clear for the future so that the board knows where they stand.
I read you. This next question, for context, came up on your earlier slides around community impact and capacity,
Okay.
which may or may not be relevant, but I think it is. The question is about strategic planning,
Mhm.
and uh, maybe, and this is me reading between the lines, strategic planning can sort of capture big picture,
Mhm.
uh, you know, decision making, direction setting outside of the course of regular quarterly or monthly board meetings.
Mhm.
So I think, and Jan, expand on this if I'm building on you wrong, but the question is simply, Elizabeth, how you feel strategic planning plays into board decision making.
I think strategic planning can play a really helpful role in decision making or in board decision making because I think it helps you set priorities. So it goes back to a lot of those consideration questions of like, who do we serve? How do we serve them? What are our priorities? One thing that I've seen really helpful with strategic plans, probably in the last probably 7 or 8 years, is shoot, now I'm gonna forget the name, but it's like a screening document. So like you have your whole strategic plan and then there's like a screening questions. It's like a one pager that I've seen used really well. And it's like questions we should be asking ourselves when we're making big decisions, right? So does it fit
So
our mission? Does it do these different things? I know that we have a bunch of strategic planning people on our team, and they really like that because it takes that big strategic plan and makes it a little more actionable. So like if we have a big new funding proposal coming our way, like does it does it meet these questions? Or if like I have a client comes to me who wants to work with us, but their mission feels not quite aligned with ours. How do we make those decisions? And so it's like a screening a use. It's like what am I? I'm working for a word. I don't remember what that word is. But it's like a screener to use for your decision making.
Yeah, like a cheat sheet, a ready reference
Yeah.
guide
Yep.
to prime your thinking. I
Yep.
like that as somebody who is aware, self-aware enough to know that I'll show up to the same space in a different mood with different priorities front of mind, different days. And so
Yep.
my own vote on something critical may change from day to day, even though
Yeah.
the objective facts are not. So something like that might be, and hopefully
Yeah.
I'm not alone in that regard, and then you can read yourself into that.
Yeah, and I
To
think
that
that
end,
goes to what we were talking about too, and I know we're like at the end, but that goes to like our board shouldn't be at the whim of people's personalities for the day, right? And like my mood shouldn't dictate the decisions that we're making.
right, right. Which also, to go back to your earlier point, is sort of the chief reason to have an MOU in place,
Yep.
even if you function perfectly fine without one.
Yep.
I think if you drill down, you'll find that there's a relational component, and
Hmm.
your relationship with the library works because the friends leads play well with the library director. But when those chairs turn over, you will be glad that you have something, some sort of Bible in place.
Yeah. And a
Uh,
strategy screen was that word I was looking for. A
Strategy score.
strategy
Okay.
screen. I
All
would look
right.
it up. It's great.
All right. Yeah, and JF was actually wondering if you could, and it doesn't have to be here on the call, obviously, because we're at the hour, but if that's a shareable rubric or template.
I can see what I can find. I don't think we have anyone officially, but I'll see if I can dig something up and share it.
Okay, great. It must be a grassroots thing that's bubbling up. Glad
Yeah.
to hear it. That's great. Yeah, some really energizing side chatter, much of which I realize you can't see, Elizabeth,
I know.
but
I'm like, I
we
feel
could
like I'm
end
missing out
on
on the party, right?
it is, to use your phrase, also some inside baseball. So
Yes,
we wouldn't want to
absolutely.
distract you
That's true. I
from
get
your
distracted
main
by the chat
main
too easily.
mission. This was a great hour. You covered, I think, speaking for myself, just what we needed you to.
Perfect.
Yeah, and on that, we'll end right on the hour, and I'll follow up with everybody via email, per usual, on behalf of Mouth.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, team.